The best-selling novelist of all time, Agatha Christie continues to appeal to readers. Credited with popularising the murder mystery, Agatha's novels have captured the imagination of billions of readers across decades. Many years after she became a popular novelist, we're asking why. Welcome back to Explained, the Southampton Solent University podcast, where we attempt to unpack what's going on behind the scenes of modern life, from sport and science to music and law, and everything in between. I'm your host, Robin O'Mahony, and in this episode, we're exploring all things Agatha Christie, from the magic of her novels and the mystery that surrounds the novelist's own life, to the continued global obsession with her works. Today I'm joined by leading Agatha Christie historian and Solent's own Associate Professor of Screen Histories, Dr Mark Aldridge. Mark is the author of award-winning non-fiction books which uncover the life and work of Agatha Christie, a go-to expert often called upon for television and radio, and the co-host of The Swinging Christies, a podcast which explores the life of Agatha Christie in the 1960s. At Solent, Mark teaches across film and television and supervises PhD students. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, Robin.
Thanks so much for
lovely
being
intro,
here.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I like to flatter the guests.
Yes, good. Yes, that got me in a good mood to begin with before you throw me with a difficult question.
I feel like there was so much more I could have said as well. But as we're going to find out in this episode, you know a lot about Agatha Christie.
I think that's fair to say,
yes.
Yeah.
So to kick off, I feel like we can't assume that everyone knows a lot about Agatha Christie, the Queen of Crime. So for those who might not be clued in on her and her importance and her legacy, can you give us a quick introduction?
Sure. So Agatha Christie is the author of 66 mystery or crime novels and about 150 short stories, a few dozen plays, lots of other stuff as well. And they have gone on to be probably the types of stories that are most heavily associated with the crime fiction genre, with the murder mystery genre. She is very heavily referenced, very much discussed. I mean, we're recording this around the same time as the third Knives Out film is coming out, and the director and writer of that, Ryan Johnson, very explicit in the publicity, has cited Agatha Christie as an influence. But Christie herself is really interesting because she was born in 1890 and died in 1976. Which I think is just the most extraordinary period to live through. The idea that you would be born as a Victorian and grow up as a Victorian and be a fully fledged adult in the First World War, and yet by the time you die, you've got colour television, you've got computers, you've got the whole world. We've been to the moon by the time of 1976. And so it's really an extraordinary snapshot of a woman in a world where lots of things are changing. And she's not always consciously writing about it. She's not consciously writing social history all the time. But when you go back and read them now, things like the relationships between people, between different classes, between genders, between all sorts of things, they often give you a good indication as to how the world changes, and we see that through her books. So they've stayed really successful, very influential, as I say, and so so she remains the big name really in crime fiction.
Absolutely. And when we think about, like you said, she lived in an extraordinary time, lots of change, but today still people love it. They love what she writes. So between 4 and 5 million books are sold every year still, which is incredible. And her last novel, tell me if I'm wrong, 1973.
Last one she wrote, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this feels really exceptional that she's still, flying off the shelves.
Absolutely.
Why do we still love her work? Is it that social commentary that's quite subtle, or do we find comfort in her novels? Because although they're murder mysteries, they're kind of cozy.
Well, the dreaded word cozy.
Cozy crime.
Yeah, cozy crime. I would argue against coziness.
Okay.
But that's fine. She's often classified as that. But just simply because, you were saying that you just watched the Mirror Cracked movie and saying how that isn't cozy.
It's not cozy.
No, absolutely. And that's pretty much what you see of all of her works. It might be beautiful villages or lovely surroundings or on a nice train, but there's brutal murder or murders at the centre of them. And usually the murder is for a particular gain that also has got a very dark side to it. People aren't just randomly murdered because they want a little bit of money from that person. That can occasionally be the case, but generally there's a real psychology behind it. And so cozy isn't a word that I associate with it, but I understand why people do. But in terms of her enduring appeal, well, a lot of it is because her books are still very readable now. They're not very long, is a big thing, actually. They're, Body in the Library is only just over 50,000 words, which you would never get away with now, and that's a particularly short one. But by modern standards, they are short books. They're very, very accessible, so lots of people come to them as some of their first adult books. But along all of that, they've got brilliantly drawn characters and plots that you just have to get to the end of. So that is a big factor in it, is that no matter who you are, you can't start an Agatha Christie and not want to know who done it. So by the end, you're trapped. She's trapped you. She's made sure that you're not going to escape anytime soon.
And actually, spoilers coming. I'm going to take an obvious one, but Murder on the Orient Express.
Yes.
What's really very smart about that is it's all of them.
Yes.
And the reasons, and you're right, I was wrong to use the word cozy, really, because in that, the reasons for, the motivations for those murders are really very deep.
Absolutely, yeah.
So you're right, they're not cozy, they're not light. There's some really strong issues of class and, I guess, money,
which is often linked,
the corruptive power of money.
And very often it's people not wanting to lose their money. It's not even about people wanting to get it from other people, but the fear that some revelation will come out that will lose them their status or lose them their money. But there's a lot to be said about what we learn about particularly Britain, but not just Britain in her books.
There's a lot of layers and why people enjoyed them. So what's your favourite and your least favourite?
Well,
if there's a least favourite.
I'll have to give you some answer. But my favourite changes all the time. Right now, I'm feeling like I particularly love Endless Night, which is one of her later books, which is narrated by a working class young man to whom all sorts of mysterious things happen. And I can't say any more than that, but what I will say is that the BBC is about to adapt it for next year. So you don't want me to give you any spoilers now anyway, but that's a really dark tale, very clever. And the idea that a woman in her 70s is still coming up with these brilliant sort of stories, I just find great. And personally, that is also a story that when I read it, I think that's the one that turned me into a fan, rather than somebody who just enjoyed reading them. That's the one that I was like, wow, that's amazing. So that right now I'll say is my favourite. Least favourite, I'm just going to cheat really and say that when Agatha Christie had a breakdown in the 1920s, she cited The Mystery of the Blue Train as a book that she hated because she was so unhappy while writing it, and she basically had to write it for the money and because the publishers were expecting it. But her husband had just left her mother had just died, and so she always says it's a terrible book. And you read it, and I don't think it's a terrible book, but you can also see she's really working hard to bring it to a novel length. It's based on an earlier short story she wrote, and she expands this story. But you read it, go, yeah, this is quite a lot of just added material to get it to word count. So in sympathy with her difficult situation, I will say Mystery of the Blue Train might be.
It's a very kind answer. So we know that Agatha Christie kind of created a genre in some ways. Although when I was doing my research, actually, I was led to Edgar Allan Poe as the first kind of writer of crime fiction. But then Agatha was mentioned as kind of cultivating a more specific approach.
I think cultivating is a really good word, actually. That really applies well. It's funny, if you go to America, they'll all say it's Edgar Allan Poe. And in Britain, they'll say it's Wilkie Collins who wrote The Moonstone. And actually, then lots of people go, oh, also Charles Dickens sort of did it in Bleak House as well. So what you end up with is lots and lots of different approaches to writing these sorts of stories. It seems like this must have always existed, and to an extent it does, but really the popular modern version of it, Agatha Christie helped to popularise because she was so good at it. As with so many people who end up being famous for reinventing something, they almost always are taking things that have been done elsewhere. So you look at like the character of Poirot, Agatha's first detective, who's a Belgian, retired Belgian detective. And of course he lives on the outside of society. He's very precise. He sees things differently, very similar to Sherlock Holmes, who also saw things very, very differently, didn't really interact with the rest of society in a way, wasn't a sociable person. So they both have their own ways of being outside of the rest of the world and seeing things in a different way. And yet they also investigate quite different crimes, because Sherlock Holmes, generally, they're not whodunits. They are sort of mysteries. Why is this man following this woman, or
puzzles?
Who does it? Puzzles, yeah. But actual sort of fully clued whodunits. Agatha is one of the people, but she writes extensively. Every time she was asked about it, she'd give you another half dozen titles of books that had influenced her. So she was always very open about it.
I love that her legacy, though, is just super established, and that people are still referring to her. And I think I like that as well, because she is a woman. She was a woman, and especially in that time period, it was very difficult for. And I remember reading about how much she actually made in her lifetime, or what her kind of financial legacy was at the end. And I was really shocked, because it wasn't a lot.
No.
Which I feel like now, if she were writing today, it would be.
Yes.
So I don't know. Was she undervalued?
There's a whole podcast series to go into why Agatha Christie didn't get her money, but part of it is tax. Actually, there was there was a double taxation at the time, which meant you would pay 90% of tax on your earnings in America, and then it came over here and they would tax you 90% again. So you would end up with 1%. It's not quite as straightforward as that, but nevertheless, a lot of that money struggled to come to her. So she wasn't poor, but she never had that sort of huge financial stability that our big name authors now might be expected to have. I very much doubt Richard Osman is worrying too much about whether he's going to keep up his mortgage repayments or anything. And nor was Agatha, but she was always worried that it would stop. Which of course it does for a lot of authors. You don't know. Now we look back and think, well, obviously it doesn't. But actually, you can understand that she doesn't know that. She doesn't know even when she reaches 60 years old, she's still got another 23 years of writing to come, but she doesn't really know that. So there's a lot of instability there in terms of her income, which is a real shame, and she found very stressful, which is
I bet.
really unfortunate.
What's interesting as well, you brought up Richard Osman, that I find, Richard came to writing after having a television career. And I think, with Agatha, it wasn't like that, obviously. It was just, she was, in her own merit, a writer, and a really talented writer. I feel like, do you feel like there's a lot of big crime writers today that did come through just as writers, or are we not seeing that as much now?
It's a real mix. So there are some people who are coming through it through sort of the old-fashioned, the Agatha Christie route of simply being writers. There's quite a few who are coming from publishing, actually, and sort of, I guess, think, I think I have got a good book in me. And there are the sort of TV tie-in ones, which, not TV tie-ins, but stars from TV or similar. I would say that, in defence of Richard Osman, that it's often phrased in this way as, he had the TV following. And I don't want to denigrate Pointless, but it is a daytime quiz show that he was one of two hosts for. Like, it's not like he was, Madonna or Tom Cruise or something. There are lots of people on TV in a similar position who do not have the success in writing it. And there are lots of TV people who have published books that haven't been anywhere near as popular. So there is no doubt that being a name that you can put on a cover and people can recognise is a help in the publishing industry. But for Richard Osman in particular, there is no reason for his books to have been as hugely successful as they have been, other than the fact people really like them.
In terms of people loving crime as a reader and a watcher, clearly the success of Richard Osman, the ongoing success of Agatha, lots and lots of other authors, Paula Hawkins, is it, for example? I think that's the author of Girl on the Train.
Oh, yeah.
We love it. We love crime, but fake crime, not real crime.
Yes.
But I wanted to ask you why, so these characters in particular, so those detectives, like Patricia Cornwall, for example, she did it with Scarpetta. So we've got Poirot and Miss Marple in Agatha Christie's case. They're very important figures in this genre, I feel.
Yeah.
You speak to anyone, they all know who they are. Why did they love those characters and still love them so much now?
Well, I think that there are slightly different reasons for both of those. Firstly, with Poirot, I think that the type of mysteries he's in is actually just as important. Like, they're really strong mysteries. I mean, all of Agatha's are, but they are. I feel like she saves her most complex ones often for Poirot because he's got this sort of detective background. He can look at different clues in different ways. And so when you've got somebody who is, and he's sort of sweet, he can be grumpy at times as well, he can be rude, but he's someone who you quite want to know and you trust and you admire and you're interested in. And that's a big thing. And he's so different and distinctive. He's not just Inspector Smith from Scotland Yard or whatever. I think Miss Marple's slightly different because I think that she is a much warmer character.
She's very sociable.
Very sociable. And yet ignored. And I think a lot of people can relate to that she's got everything going on in her brain, but nobody's really asking her. And they're almost quite annoyed when she knows stuff.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really attractive quality. It's weird, in the 20s, when Miss Marple first appeared, there were a few others similar creations that came at about the same time. So it wasn't people copying each other. But I wonder how much of that is from... In the First World War, there was sort of a deficit of young men, basically. So there were, they'd gone to war, and obviously many of them lost their lives, and so it meant that there were a lot more women who at that time would be called spinsters, in other words, didn't marry.
Because a whole generation
because
was
there's
lost,
a whole,
essentially.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if there's something about that actually then becoming more visible, that actually people, going into middle age and older, who clearly were never going to marry, and so there might be that some sort of thing about them being a part of society that they've been underappreciated, let's say.
And telling those stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And actually, I think her being ignored as someone reliable, a reliable source for crime solving, makes her more powerful.
Yes.
Because she's able to just sort of go about her
her
snooping and come to the conclusion.
Yes,
and
under the radar, without people thinking she's going to...
But yeah, I watched one recently where she was on holiday in the Caribbean.
Yes.
She gets around.
She does, yeah. Caribbean mystery.
She's got a great life. Before we move on to the screen, do you have a favourite actor who played Poirot and a favourite actress that played Miss Marple?
Yes, I do. I love David Suchet as Poirot, and I love Joan Hickson as Miss Marple. I think that they are both the best. I think there have been other great Poirots and Miss Marples. I think, though, very often it's about the age when you get introduced to the characters, and that's what's in our head, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what we associate with them. I remember being so amazed when about 10 years ago there was a question on, I think, the Facebook page of Agatha Christie, and they asked a question of, who's your favourite Miss Marple, and people were saying lots, Joan Hickson won, but lots of people were saying, Geraldine McEwen, who played Miss Marple on ITV about 20 years ago. And people were saying, I loved watching her when I was a kid. And I was like, oh my God, where's this come from? How have I got old all of a sudden? Like, she, for me, is still the modern Miss Marple.
Yeah.
So it's very often that, about the first one that you encounter, I think solidifies the character in your brain.
I think you're totally right, because Little Women, I love the version where Winona Ryder's Jo.
Oh, yes.
And objectively, Greta Gerwig's Little Women is better.
Yes.
Objectively, right? In terms of lots acting, the budget that film had, the faithfulness of the adaptation. But I can't... Saoirse Ronan's not Jo.
You just don't love it in the way that you love.
It's always going to be Winona, because that's what I was watching when I was a child, So I totally get what you mean by that, actually. And, again, like... Richard Harris is Dumbledore. Sorry, no one else agrees with that, though. Everyone thinks it's Michael Gambon, but for me, it's got to be him. So, Agatha's work has been adapted hundreds of times for film, TV, radio, and stage. What are some of your favourite adaptations, and what are your general views? So, it's two questions: your favourite adaptations, and kind of your general views on the way these stories are adapted, and perhaps the role they play in introducing people to Agatha.
Oh yeah, I mean, they definitely do. I mean, as I say, we're recording this in December 2025. In a month, I'm looking at my watch, in 5 weeks, Netflix is going to release the new Agatha Christie Seven Dials mystery adaptation, which has, I know they've invested a lot in, and I think is going to have a lot of publicity around it. And I suspect will not be the last, all going well, that Netflix will do. So that's exactly the sort of thing where people can encounter Agatha Christie in different ways, that it might be through repeats of old ones. It might be through streaming. It might be through new, BBC adaptations. For me, the best adaptations are the ones that keep the essence of the original story, that don't make major changes, but add something new to it. So, for example, Witness for the Prosecution is a brilliant play and also a short story that Agatha Christie wrote. It's still running in London, or is running in London at the moment. The film of that is, I think, probably the best adaptation of Agatha Christie, because it takes everything that's in the play, but it also adds humour. It adds a flashback so that we know the characters better. It bolsters the characterization more so that we know more about, like, the barrister, for example. We know who he is, and he's not just a man in court. And that, for me, is the perfect way to do it, is to say, look, we're not changing the plot, but we're bringing something new
Adding
to it.
Yeah,
Exactly, to just make it more of an immersive screen experience rather than just a retelling of the story. So that's what I think worked really well. I'm not very keen on the ones that make huge changes, because I think it's okay to do things like drop characters, to change the location, to move it around, and quite often they'll like add an extra murder or something, and that's fine in my book. I think changing the identity of the killer's a step too far, because that's then not the book, and that doesn't work for me. But I'm also very strongly of the opinion that when you have as many adaptations as you do of Agatha Christie, they can't all be the same. And so you get the really interesting ones by allowing producers and directors and writers to try something new. And that means you're not always going to like it. Or indeed, ones that I don't like, you might love, and vice versa. You can't keep making everything for Mark Aldridge. Like, much as I'd love the world to spin around me like that, it doesn't.
No, I know what you mean.
There's other people who want a different type of Agatha Christie.
Well, it's so subjective, and I think about adaptations, and they're risky business.
Yeah.
I'm a voracious reader, and a lot of the books I read end up at some point getting bought for film and TV. Whether they end up on film and TV is a different matter, because some just stay in development for a really long time, don't they? But I guess it depends what the source material is. But like you said, there are opportunities for really like adding and layering to the story. But then there's also that thing of like, how much detail from the book do you need to carry over as well? So it's that fine line, isn't it? But like you said, in terms of changing the identity of a murderer, so that's almost a director or writer saying, do you know what, I think I know the story better than Agatha.
Yes.
And I'm like, no, you don't.
Yes.
Stop it.
Yeah, and I think it immediately puts you on the back foot of going, no, we're not on the same wavelength here. So yes, I feel the same.
Definitely. And do you think that, because before we started recording, our lovely Megan, who does the sound, made a comment about something she'd seen on TikTok, which was someone was watching an Agatha Christie show and they didn't want an advert for an accessible bath. Are we seeing younger audiences come to Agatha, or have a range of ages always liked Agatha?
Range of ages always liked Agatha. I mean, I think that, dare I say, that if you're into retirement, you may maybe have a little bit more time to be able to watch your repeats, and I'm very much looking forward to that, and to read more Agatha Christie again. But I tell you, I do these events, go to the Agatha Christie Festival and speak, and the range of people you see in the audience is huge, from teenagers all the way up, and people coming from all around the world. So, very, very diverse interests, and not always people who you expect either. There's sometimes people who you think wouldn't be that interested are, and maybe even vice versa. But yes, she still appeals to a lot of people.
She's for everyone.
She is for everyone. Yeah, that's why we're still talking about her half a century after she died.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is one of the things I was going to come on to a bit later, but let's just jump in now. Not many writers become celebrities.
No.
It's really rare, unless they're already a celebrity. You could probably speak to anyone and they would be like, oh yeah, Agatha Christie. They'd be able to name something.
Yes.
That is a rare achievement.
Yes, it is. I remember her grandson, who's still with us, and he said that he used to obviously go to events, and often they'd say, oh no, who are you? And he'd be there maybe on behalf of Agatha Christie Limited. And he said that I'd often get that first question, but I would never get the follow-up question of who's Agatha Christie. Like, 'cause people know automatically, no matter where you are in the world, that you've got Agatha Christie is a well-known. I mean, I've spoken about her in India, in Spain. She's so popular around the world.
She transcends language.
Yes, yes.
So one adaptation we do want to speak about is Kenneth Branagh's.
Mm-hmm.
Which includes so he's done 3,
yes,
which includes A Haunting in Venice, which is based on the 1969 novel Halloween Party.
Yes.
So we wanted to get your thoughts on this one specifically because it's quite supernatural. There are horror elements, which is fairly kind of in opposition to Poirot's very kind of rational outlook. He's very cynical. He's like, no, magic, stupid.
Yes.
So the New York Times, hey guys, in a review of the film said, in straddling genres, haunting can get stuck in the middle, but there's fun to be had there, which is a nice way of saying it released a mixed thoughts and feelings.
Yes.
It did well commercially. It's Kenneth Branagh though. We all love him, don't we? So what's your feeling on these kind of revitalised, refreshed takes on her works?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind that you're going to try something new, and I think that Haunting Venice is not a favourite of mine. It didn't really land for me, for a similar reason that the New York Times said, which is it sort of slightly lost its focus, and I think there's lots of very odd bits in that film where I feel like it doesn't quite come together. So I was watching it for my own podcast actually not very long ago because we were going to talk about it, and we rewatched it and we were like, where is it all happening? Like even the geography of the house in which it takes place, suddenly there's like a spiral staircase, and so I never quite felt that it was focused in a way that it could, and there are some bits added that I just didn't buy, frankly. But I know that for lots of people they've enjoyed it the most of the 3 because it did sort of stop worrying too much about the source material and say, these are little bits we're going to take from Halloween Party. Also takes bits uncredited from another book, Third Girl, and it sort of mashes them all together and creates its own story out of it. It seems a little odd to me that when you have only done 2, that you wouldn't take one of the many other Poirot stories and just go with them fairly straightforward. But clearly they wanted, I guess, it to be distinctive genre-wise. And I think it had to be a cheaper film as well. I think that was part of, because Death on the Nile had been so expensive and then released into COVID. It's like, that's not a time you want to be releasing an expensive film.
Yeah, it didn't do well, the second one, for various reasons, did it?
No.
I mean, because I kind of felt like with the first one, it was like a passion. I felt like it was a passion project for Kenneth Branagh, in the sense that he is very passionate about the works that he adapts. And yeah, for me, I was like, oh, he must really love the work of Agatha Christie. You can tell.
Yeah.
And then when I was watching Haunting in Venice, I was like, oh dear. Not to be horrible, but I was like, I don't know what I'm watching. And I think I turned it off actually because I just didn't understand. I wasn't feeling connecting with the vibe of the film.
I can understand that because it does do that thing of you're not quite sure what the film is wanting to do. And all of the sort of supernatural stuff, the ghost stuff, the horror stuff, it is resolved to some extent towards the end. But whether that has been worth it all, I'm not so sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do like people trying different things because also I don't have to watch them again. Like I'd rather that than everybody just make the same thing every time. That's no fun at all.
Well, yeah. So that sort of brings me on to kind of, do we need more adaptations?
Yes.
Cool.
We do though, because you want that freshness, even in terms of style. Like the BBC Miss Marples from the 80s and early 90s are absolutely beautiful and they're immaculately done, but they're starting to look a bit old-fashioned now, even though they're shot on film and but like the camera work even is quite old-fashioned. The pace of it is slower than you would have now. So I love them for that. But I think for a modern audience, there are absolutely ways that you can, for example, tell those Miss Marple stories again, still be faithful, but have it feel a bit more modern in terms of its style, because styles change. You can't outrun that.
Yeah.
Unless you're Agatha Christie, actually, because she doesn't have to change.
I mean, is she just, for directors, producers, screenwriters, just they know they're going to do well? So is it risk-free, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Nothing's risk-free. So that's a bit of a dismissive response, isn't it? But it's no, because you've got to get it right. And if you get it wrong too often, then people aren't going to come back. So you can have the occasional project that lands poorly, but you've got to give the audience reasons to believe that you're going to continue to make high quality stuff. So I'm sure there are all sorts of business factors at play, but it's not in anyone's interest for there to be poor quality Agatha Christie material out there.
No.
We might not like it because it might not be to our tastes, but the brand identity, not to make it too business-like, but it's important that it's quality. Like, that's what people associate Agatha Christie with, which is not necessarily true of all authors who perhaps you might associate with genres or types of stories, but not necessarily with them being high quality. And I think with Agatha Christie, she is a stamp of quality.
And do we know if there are kind of rules in place? Because I'm just thinking about, for example, there have been adaptations of other authors' work. Donna Tartt, I think, was not happy with one of her adaptations. Sally Rooney doesn't want her work to be adapted again, even though she was happy with Normal People, I believe, and was not happy with the second adaptation, which was not received well commercially or critically. Obviously, there were nothing in place in those instances to say that the people that were adapting the work couldn't just go with wherever they wanted to go. Is there something in place for the work of Agatha Christie?
Yeah. So her work is still in copyright. So it stays in copyright for 70 years after the author's death. So it'll be out of copyright in 2047 in this country. So everything still goes through Agatha Christie Limited, and the chairman of the board of Agatha Christie Limited is James Pritchard, who was the great-grandson of Agatha Christie. So, of course, there are commercial interests, there's business reasons why you may say yes or no to things, but there is oversight there. They are making decisions in conjunction with producers. But, I mean, I don't want to speak for James, but I know that the way that it has been spoken about before, when there have been changes and stuff, is similar to what I just said, which is if you dictate too much to producers and directors and say you cannot make any changes, then you're not going to get the best talent, actually, because they're going to want to come and do what they want to do alongside, the key bits. But it'll be interesting to see with this Seven Dials mystery, because that's been adapted by Chris Chibnall, who did Broadchurch, and we did an event together a few weeks ago, and on the panel we were talking about how faithful that is, and he said that it is very faithful. Actually, he'd made a couple of changes, like he changed the gender of one character, for example, I think just to add more women to it, or to whatever, because he wanted a better balance, but he said that no, it's pretty much it's the story, and these things go in trends. There was an adaptation in about 2000, I think, of one of Agatha's stories that brought it into the modern day and made it into footballers' wives, because it was, rather than it being about society people in London in the 1940s or whatever, it was about people going out because they got loads of money because they were footballers and their wives, and those are the group. So that didn't really work. But again, it's you can understand why you'd say, well, actually, it might be interesting to take the basics of that story and say, what's our modern day equivalent of society men and women? Well, maybe they are sort of footballers and their wives, or tabloid stars. So I always think it's quite interesting to try those things, whether they work or not.
And one thing when you were speaking there, I was thinking about was when you just said about the changing of, the gender of a character. Is there an opportunity here when the works are being adapted to represent society more? I mean, I'm not sure on how representative her novels were. Maybe you could give us an insight into that. But obviously, she was writing in a very specific time. And
yes. It's again, that's something that we could talk about for a long time. But definitely, there are very specific attempts to make sure that diversity is represented in casting of adaptations and indeed of theatrical productions. So, for example, Murder is Easy, which is one of the recent BBC miniseries, the main character in that was portrayed by a black actor. Isn't black in the book, but what is quite important is that character is somebody who's been away from Britain for a while and is coming back as an outsider. And so actually I thought that the casting of a black actor was a stroke of genius, because you put a black character into just after post-war England. I think they moved it to sort of the 1940s. And actually people are going to speak to you in a slightly different way, because racism and, suspicions about race, shall we say, were even more prevalent then than unfortunately we still have now. So I think there are really interesting ways that you can do it, where you can say, well, what would our modern viewers understand this sort of character to be? Like, how would we associate with them? And in A Murder is Announced, there are two characters, two older women who live together on a farm, clearly coded as a lesbian couple, and you can depict that in different ways depending on your adaptation. In the 80s, they depicted it as, that they were very close friends, and it didn't take a lot of inference from the reader, or the viewer rather, to think that maybe there was more than that. And then in the 2000s, we actually saw them kissing, and it was quite clear that they were a couple. So there are ways that you can approach this that makes, allows for diverse cast of characters and situations.
I think there's something quite wonderful there in that it doesn't all have to be blatant. Like,
no.
Like you said, you could read it as friends, or you could be like, they love each other and they're in a relationship. And actually that's what's quite nice for audiences, is that they can take away what they would like to and what they kind of relate to.
Yes.
And from this conversation and from the things I've watched, I do feel like it is for everyone, and you can take lots of different things from an Agatha Christie story.
Yes.
And there's going to be a character that you root for, and there's going to be a character that you just want to like bop on the nose.
Yes.
I can understand why she's still so loved all around the world. So as of 2025, the only Christie novels to have not received an adaptation of any kind. Now, this was according to the internet.
It's true.
It's true. Okay.
True.
So Postern
of Fate,
Destination Unknown, Passenger to Frankfurt, and Death Comes as the End.
Postern means sort of a gate, by the way. It took me years to find out that's what it means.
Gate of Fate, then.
Well, it's like there's a whole sort of backstory to it, but it's basically supposed to be like a second easy like entrance to somewhere, like not the main door, but like a sneaky way into somewhere.
Okay.
So
why have these not been touched?
So Destination Unknown and Passenger to Frankfurt are both thrillers, so the thrillers tend not to be adapted as much anyway. There's no particular reason for Destination Unknown not being adapted. Passenger to Frankfurt is, by anyone's admission, a slightly bizarre effort. So she was 80 the year that it came out, and it's a whole thing about basically she is making the case in this book about the dangers of sort of people worshipping and of people like Hitler coming to power because they're seen as sort of, almost like godlike figures, and there's lots of very odd things that go on in that book, and so you can understand why it wouldn't be a natural choice for adaptation. There's always a way to adapt something, but it's not going to be high up anyone's list. So that's the reason for those two. Postern of Fate is the last book she wrote, and it features Tommy and Tuppence, who are two of her detectives, married couple by this point. Have been for a while by this point, decades. And Tommy and Tuppence tend not to be adapted that much anyway, although there is about to be a Tommy and Tuppence series, so, it's coming along. But Postern of Fate is a very difficult to follow book in some ways. You can tell that she's struggling to get it together, and I write about this in my books, but there are quotes even from Agatha's daughter saying, I don't know that we should have published this.
Okay.
And because it's got lots of sort of loose ends and things that don't really quite come together, so it's not a natural choice. Death Comes as the End is set in ancient Egypt. So it's actually several times has entered pre-production, and every time the money's run out. So that's the reason. But that'll come. That's one that we're, if you ask an Agatha Christie fan which one do you want to see adapted, that's one that people are really keen.
Yeah.
But you've got to recreate ancient Egypt, including a sort of harbour of boats coming in. Cheaper now than it used to be, though.
Yeah, I do feel like ancient Egypt can look very terrible on film.
Yes,
if it's not done right.
Absolutely.
So I understand that. But hopefully in the future.
Hopefully it will, I'm sure.
So before we move on to the mystery of Agatha's own life, which I am interested in, I've watched documentaries about it. A fantastic Lucy Worsley one. Did Agatha do a lot of research when she was writing about other communities of people from different backgrounds, or was that not much of a thing then?
No, it was. Yeah, so she was really interested in Africa and the Middle East in particular. Her second husband, Max, was an archaeologist. That's where they met, on an archaeological dig, and so she would go with him and really become very friendly with the people she was working with, the local people she was working with. But to use Death Comes at the End as an example, ancient Egypt, an archaeologist friend actually helped her with that, and so she told the story of she would have to ask things like, well, what would they eat for dinner, and all of these sort of domestic small things that she needed help with. So yes, she did. Yeah,
she wanted to know that she was getting it right.
She really wanted, because also she said, I know that I'll just get letters to say, you've
this
got
is
this
not
wrong.
correct.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's true though, isn't it?
Is
People,
true.
I remember someone said to me, especially with historical writing, someone somewhere in the world will know if you have not done your research and you've got it wrong.
Yes.
Whether it's like a phrase that wasn't said at the time you're writing, or so it's very important for the research to be done. I think I maybe just assumed that back when Agatha was writing, people didn't take that as seriously, but
tougher, took longer. You can
yes.
Google it.
No.
But that's where her expert friends came in.
Yeah. So she actually got the insights of people with lived experiences as well, which is really important.
Yes, she did.
Yeah.
Yes.
More insightful than the internet.
Yeah.
So Agatha gave readers a lot of pleasure with the mysteries that she presented to them, but her own life was quite mysterious. Can you tell us more about this, particularly the disappearance of Agatha Christie?
So Agatha's early life, she didn't go to school or anything like that, which seems a bit strange for us now. So she lived a quite an independent life in lots of ways, in quite a strong matriarchal family. Her father died when she was about 11 years old, I think. So there was a strong sense of women in the family. But she married her first husband, Archie, in 1914, Christmas Eve, just before we went off to war. And then in 1926, they'd had a child by then, and they were living together in Sunningdale. And Agatha's mother died that year. Not a very sort of happy, quiet death. I think it was quite painful, and so it was a very difficult time to see your mother like that. And then Archie came to see Agatha as she was essentially clearing out the house from her mother's stuff, and said, I want a divorce, basically, that I've met somebody else. And so that sort of triggered a breakdown for Agatha Christie. So she essentially went missing to externalise, but actually she had sent a letter which sort of got mislaid and sort of got ignored, where she basically said, I'm going to go away for a little bit. And so her car was found abandoned, and no sign of where she had gone. And eventually she turned up about 10 days later in Harrogate. There's a spa hotel in Harrogate, and that's where she turned up and said that she'd lost her memory. And there's a lot of it about this, and I think that Lucy Worsley's explanation is the best one.
It was a good documentary.
Yeah, and she wrote a biography as well, and it basically says, we have to believe her that actually you can enter a fugue state, which means that you don't really know what's going on. In my head, I feel it's like, when sometimes you have a dream, and in the dream you're not quite sure whether it's real or not, and things are just all a bit confusing.
Yeah.
I feel like that's probably the type of state that Agatha was in. And we know that she had like some sort of wound on her head, and she got a train up to Harrogate. So she was clearly very confused, and I suspect that her memory slowly returned. And that by the time she was found, that it was much better. But I mean, it's the sort of thing that was a mystery then, but isn't now. And I think we would be much more sympathetic now to it. Whereas at the time, there was a lot of, did she do it for publicity? Had her husband murdered her? All of these sorts of things, which, outrageous.
Press had a field day. And
that's what informed her distrust of doing interviews and everything. She'd done a few before then, as Lucy points out.
Yeah.
But and she did do a few afterwards, but was very guarded about it. For someone who had a career spanning over half a century, I'd say there's maybe 12 or 15 interviews, which is really not very much. And some of them are like 2 paragraphs long.
Yeah. I respect it though. But hearing you say about what happened to her, or what we think happened, I mean, today we would be like, she had dissociation.
Yeah.
She totally, she was burnt out. She was depressed. She was having a mental health episode.
Yes.
But obviously back then we didn't have the language for that.
No.
So, it's much more believable today.
It is.
Because we're so much more understanding. And, I've got friends, and me myself, I've had moments where I've been not well, and I've been like, where am I? What am I doing? And then you come back to yourself.
Yes.
And I think that, like you said, was probably what was happening for Agatha at the time. But because no one was talking about that.
No
one was saying that was okay and that was normal.
Yeah.
Normal to an extent, in that many of us do experience it at some point in our lives. And I think people were just loving the fact that she'd gone missing, because they were like, the murder mystery writer has probably been murdered by a husband.
Yeah, and you can see why people would think it would be a publicity act.
Saucy.
Unless you knew her, in which case that's the last thing that she would ever want, because she wasn't that sort of a woman.
No. I just think it's a very British press thing, I think. We love to grab hold of a kind of sad story, especially when it's a famous person,
especially when it's a woman.
Yes, that's a whole other podcast. So we like to end our episodes by kind of looking ahead to the future. So we know that we've got a couple of adaptations in the works to look forward to.
We do, yeah.
There was a collection of short stories. Am I making that up?
No, you are. No, you're correct.
Do we expect more like that?
Well, there is. So Lucy Foley, who's written books like
I've
The
read
Hunting
a few
Party.
of her books.
Yeah,
really
well, she's
good.
written a new Miss Marple novel, which is out in September, I think, next year. Well, around that sort of time.
Yeah.
So that's very exciting. In which Miss Marple goes to an alpine resort. I don't think I'm giving too much. I suspect she doesn't go skiing, but I think other people might.
Okay.
So that's going to be exciting to see. Lucy tackling Miss Marple. She wrote really one of the short stories. So there was this collection of new Miss Marple short stories, and she was one of the authors in that. Yeah.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on today's authors taking on those worlds that Agatha first created? Do you think it's a really nice way to reinvigorate them?
I'm happy enough with it as long as it doesn't become a sort of free-for-all, which hasn't happened, is that actually each one is quite carefully thought about who is a person who we'd like to sort of invite into this world of Agatha Christie. Lucy is a #1 US best-selling author. You don't just sort of take that decision lightly. We'll be more cautious when we inevitably reach the point that this all falls out of copyright and everyone thinks they can... God, AI is bound to write a million, terrible Miss Marple stories.
Or by that point we might be like, oh no, AI is really bad.
Well, I hope so. That's the wish for us all.
When that does happen, so was it
2047?
Yeah. What do you think will happen? Are you worried?
I'm not worried. It's not my pension. No, will I be retired by 2047? Might just. So, am I worried? I think it will be interesting to see what happens. But I've noticed in America, because in America they've got different copyright laws, which means it's 95 years after publication. It's got nothing to do with when the author died.
Okay.
So actually the first few stories... first 10 years or so actually are out of copyright now in America. Doesn't seem to have made that much difference, other than people keep trying to adapt them for the stage, and there are lots of very cheap, crappy, publications that you can buy of them. But I mean, I've done that before, unwittingly, not with Agatha Christie, but another author. I bought one that happened to be a really cheap edition of a book, a Dorothy L. Sayers book, and it just was unreadable because the text was so poor. So I just thought, well, of course I'll just buy an authorised edition next time. I hadn't really realised that this one was out of copyright. And I think that's what will happen, is people are going to want quality versions of it regardless.
Absolutely. So that leads me to my final question, which is, will there always be a passion for Agatha, like a thirst for Agatha stories?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, look, over 100 years she's been entertaining us. I think that's enough time to say that she's going to... her popularity will certainly outlive anyone listening to this podcast.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to say thank you, because you are the go-to expert, and we're really fortunate to have you here at Solent and to have you on the podcast, so thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Robin.
Big thanks to Mark for joining us on this week's episode of Explained, and thank you, listener, for tuning in. Like what you heard today? Let us know. You can find us online at solent.ac.uk, as well as on all your favourite podcast and social media platforms. Leave a review to let us know what you thought of today's episode, and be the first to hear the next episode by hitting that subscribe button. And as we head into 2026, a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you all. Thank you, and see you soon.